So with anything, sometimes you run into some troubling times, and this spring has really been troubling for us. I tragically lost my brother in a fire. My mother was diagnosed with cancer and she's going through chemo, and my uncle died, as well as my pump failed down there. So there was a bit of time in the middle of coronavirus hitting us and our carriage business was shut down that we seriously neglected the garden. It was really last on our priority list. We really needed to take care of our family. But it really gave us a good insight into what requires a lot of input and what requires less input. And so today, as we walk around and look at these different things, we keep in mind on how we can actually garden and not have such intensive input into the system. We can do more fire and forget and let God's creation take over. So welcome back. Some of you might remember in the spring we transplanted all our strawberries from the ground up to these straw bales. It was an experiment, and as with any experiment, some things work and some things don't work so well. But there are some limitations with the strawberry gardening that I think we should point out, because we like to share our failures as much as our successes so that you don't do the same thing. You don't want to make the same mistakes we do. Now, I will say this. The bales, at first they got in, the transplants were not really thriving very well, but we had a lot of rain and we started getting strawberries pretty quickly, and we were pretty excited about that. One thing we figured out though is these bales dry out fast. They I guess aspirate from the sides and the top and everything like that. We thought they would hold water a little bit better. They don't. These lines help tremendously, these soaker hoses here that we have put in. They help tremendously, but I can put 400 gallons on this, which is roughly 2 inches of water for these bales. It would be like the equivalent of 2 inches of rain. I could put 400 gallons in here a couple times a week, and that was just to keep up. Okay, so it required a tremendous amount of water because that water was going right through the bale and then leaching out. So what we plan to do this season, now that we're done with the strawberries, is we're going to go ahead and let them decompose down, cut the strings, let the strawberries go down with them, and use the straw next year as more of a mulch than anything. I think next year they should pop up pretty well, because as soon as these bales decompose down to 50% or 40%, they're going to be able to hold water much, much better, and I think we'll have a better season. So let's go over here then and look at the other square bale gardening projects that we tried. Well, like we saw over at the other bale gardens and portions of it, the bales have some advantages and disadvantages. Really, here in the bigger garden, you begin to see those, and we can do some side by side. But first, let me say, the straw bales require a tremendous amount of water, and of course these water lines helped us quite a bit. But I'm thinking 4 times as much water probably as the ones that are in the ground. They just don't retain the water like the other ones do. And some of that has to do with these probably weren't fully composted yet. But I will say that we did have some success in the straw. And so for somebody in the city that doesn't have soil, it's probably worth doing the straw bales if all you have is concrete or poor soil, because you could set it up on an automatic watering system, and we've seen people that have actually used 2 drip lines per bale, and it works really great. So it's not to say that these don't work, but the amount of inputs, especially the water input, here on the farm is a little bit difficult, because we're transporting water from 55 feet below where we are and about 800 feet that way. So it's a little more difficult than plugging into a faucet with a timer on it. So let's do some direct comparisons. We'll start with the green beans here. Now, green beans. If you look at the split screen, you'll notice that the ones on the straw bale are a lot smaller. Well, they were actually transplanted from the inside direct into the bale. About a month before, these were direct seeded into the ground. So not only did these catch up, they quickly passed them. And I've been watering the ones on the bale a lot more. So it's not to say that they can't live on there, but right now we've got beans growing on these, and you can see some of the blooms right here. We've picked a few beans, not a whole lot, but we're producing some, not getting much off the bales at all right now. These potatoes were set in about 12 inches down into the bale, and we were quite surprised at how quickly they shot up to the surface. They found their way up there pretty darn fast. But once they made it to the surface, they didn't do much after that. I'm guessing maybe it's water, and in fact Danielle actually took this guy out, harvested some potatoes and stuck them back in. He actually came back to life. But compared to the potatoes in the other row, these are about maybe half the size, maybe a quarter of the size, but the amount of water these require is significantly more. Well, good news for those of you who live in the city. If you love summer squash loves straw bales. These girls are doing great. We've already harvested quite a bit. Really, the only problem I've seen with these summer squash in the bales is that they actually fall off the bales. So it might be good to put maybe 2 bales next to each other to actually keep them on the bale once they grow out. We've already harvested quite a bit off of this, and I do not see squash bug like we did last year. So maybe being up off the ground keeps them a little bit cleaner from the squash bug. Maybe it allows the guineas to get in and eat the squash bugs and see the eggs under the leaves a little bit better. I'm not sure. But we also had a volunteer winter squash come up over there. I'm not sure what's on that. So we're gonna leave it go. I'm gonna go ahead and clear a path for it, let it run down this valley. Oh, and I've got a ladybug on there. I love ladybugs. Ladybugs are great insects. They eat aphids, and I've seen a good crop of ladybugs this year. Maybe the straw bales brought them too. Who knows? I wish you guys could see the bloopers that we do before this. My wife just yelled at me for playing with the zucchini while I was trying to video this, but you know when you walk around the garden and you see vegetables, you pick them. So I'm going to put this down so it's not distracting. Okay, so the tomatoes overall, I'm going to have to say that I don't see a big difference between the straw bales and the ground. One difference I do see is we don't have many on the ground right now because when we had this really late frost, like May 6th, it took out a lot of the tomato plants on the ground. But on here we had these little milk cartons that we cut a hole in the bottom and we put them on. We had milk jugs all the way down here, and it acted like a little mini greenhouse, and it protected all of our tomatoes from that late frost. Now, the size and consistency is basically because we have different types of tomatoes here. They're not all the same type tomatoes. We're already getting tomatoes here. We're getting a few of them on the ground. But one thing I'm concerned about here is, although I think this would be great in the city to throw this on a concrete patio or something and do the straw bales, we're a little bit concerned about how we're going to hold these things up once they get big, because you know tomatoes tend to fall over and these cages aren't real strong. I'm probably going to have to reinforce with a couple of T-posts and some wire between the T-posts to hold the cages up, and then train these things up along the wires. I'm going to have to probably have a little support here. When those bales begin to drop down, we're hoping they stay steady. But right now, I'm pretty happy with the tomatoes on the bale, but I tell you what, I'm putting a lot of water in them, that's for sure. Now here we are on the peppers, and a friend of ours would probably laugh at us for actually planting peppers in a straw bale because they love the hard, deep clay that we have here, and he had some great success with peppers. Not surprisingly, the ones in the ground are doing better than the ones on the bale. And I want to point something out right here. I haven't watered these in over a week. I can't remember the last time I watered these ones on the ground though, but look at the ones on the bale. I have watered those twice this past week, and the ones on the bale are weeping like weeping willows. So you can see that this straw bale requires a tremendous amount of water to keep up, especially with these peppers, but you know, some plants show it worse than others. Don't know what I'm going to get out of these straw bales this year, but I'll keep trying. I'm pretty sure that I'm going to have some pretty good success down here because our ground is actually made for peppers. This is a good show of our winter squash here. I believe these are delicatas here, and we've got some spaghetti squash there. They kind of came up pretty nice, and then they stalled. And I think this is a water issue because I do not have a drip line on the end here. It has to be hand watered. I have kids that are helping me with the watering, so when it's hand watering, they tend not to get as much water as the rest of it. But I wanted to compare this back to the winter squash that we saw over by the summer squash that was a volunteer. It's probably 10 times this size, and it just volunteered right up out of the ground. So for a plant like a winter squash or a melon, a cantaloupe or something like that that needs a lot of water, you're going to have to come up with some sort of system to keep the water in these bales. So I'll try to get these caught up with the watering system out here. But you can see a big difference between the two. Next in line are the vining plants, and every single one of these were planted on the bale. The other thing about this is every single group of plants was done the exact same day. So you can tell the difference between different plants in different bales and the same bale and learn a lot, and we have learned a lot. So let's come down here and take a look at these bales. First of all, we realize that anything planted on the edge of a bale has a problem with drying out very quickly, and as things compost from the center on out, they're not getting that composted section of the bale. You can see that with this little guy right here. Very close to the edge, didn't get to the compost, dried out very quickly because he was so close to the edge. Now, contrast that with his partner just on the other side. Only a couple inches further in on the bale, but definitely when I dig into that, that part is moist and it's composted, and that vine is about 4 feet tall. Now, contrast that with the guys in this bale. You can see this bale has collapsed. Well, it's collapsed because when things compost, they drop down 50%, 60%, and so this one composted a lot quicker and a lot better. It holds water a lot better. And guess what? The vines, we're looking at 6 to 8 feet on these. In fact, that one is going right up over the top. So huge difference in how the bale was prepared. And we've learned a lot from that because I did not prepare these properly, or at least I did not prepare them consistently, because I have some really good loofahs and I have some, well, not so good loofahs. Okay, we're a little bit further down from the loofahs. We had learned our lesson by the time the cantaloupes got out here. They came out here a lot later than the loofahs, but I began to see a lot of inconsistencies. So when I came to these bales, you'll notice how far in on the bale the cantaloupes are. They're really close to the center there. Now, when they vine, I can spread them out on these trellises, so I can bring them out apart from each other on the trellises and give them plenty of space, but I planted them near the center. The other thing I did was I got a lot more water in these bales before I put them in there. You can see when I took those transplants a week or so ago, these things had hardly any transplant shock. Now, today they're looking a little peaked because it's around 100 degrees and it's full sun today, so looks like they might need a little water tonight. But definitely far more successful than the loofahs and far more consistent. All of these plants look about the same. Well, they were planted the same day. Watering here. Now the peas, we could say total disaster, or we could just say mostly disastrous. Don't know what happened. They shot up again. I'm pretty certain it was water, because when it was raining, these things shot up out of the ground. The transplants did not do well. The seeds did very well for about a week or two. They shot up, started reaching for the trellis, and then all of them just died on back. I just think that I can't keep enough water in these bales. That's probably the issue that we're having. We've got some carrots over there. Don't know if they'll do any good, but we'll just keep trying. It's all about learning. So let's head over here to Three Sisters. Okay, here we are at Three Sisters, and we've had some success. We've had some failure, just like with everything else. One of the issues that we ran into early on was the compost that we used down off the track. We have compost that's kind of heavy soil, and we've got some that's kind of light soil, and we have to balance what we put in what. Well, because we're doing pumpkins here, we thought, oh yeah, we're going to have a real light soil. Well, that kind of doesn't do well with the corn, because when the corn gets tall and the wind blows, it blows right over, because it needs a pretty good solid foundation there, especially for heavy winds. And with these Three Sisters kind of being apart like this, some of them fell over. And the other thing is probably not enough nitrogen in there, because what I see here is I see my beans going faster than my corn. My corn is supposed to shoot up and the beans come crawling after it. Well, as you can see, this bean here, he's looking for more corn plants. So next year maybe we can get a little better on that. But I'm looking forward really to the pumpkins on this one, because this is really ideal soil for the pumpkins. It's got straw to crawl over. We're maintaining the weeds pretty well. I'm not too concerned about the grasses. So later on, we're going to come back and see how the pumpkins are faring in all this. But right now, we're pretty happy with what's going on. So we've got watermelon here. These were transplanted from inside out to here, and by this time we had learned our lesson. First of all, we put these things in the middle of the bale. We tried to keep them away from the center of the bale. Second of all, I tried to get some good dirt in there that would actually hold water right above the composted section. I also dug out the bale to check to see how much it had composted. So I think we did a good job. The transplants came out here and immediately began growing. They're beginning to lengthen now. We're going to train those right off the straw bales into the grass next to it, which we're going to cut down and tarp so that they have a clear surface to grow on. But this last watermelon right here, this one almost completely died. And I put it in the bale and I just kept watering. I have a tendency to never give up, so I kept watering it, and it had one tiny little leaf, and I came back about a week later and it's flourishing again. So I think we've kind of learned some tricks of the trade here on the straw bale gardening, and the rest of the summer we're going to be able to catch up. Well, thanks again for watching. We love learning here at Redgate Farm, and we hope that we can share some of that knowledge with you. If you want more detailed knowledge of what we're doing and aspects of how we do things, visit our Patreon site. You can see the link below.